Hello, friends, and welcome along. Some years ago, I read this book, Healthy at 100 by John Robbins, and it set me on a path that changed my life for the better. In this book summary, I'm going to share any points that are relevant for self-help and the bits where academic works have been cited. The author really wants to save the world and change society, but I focus more on what changes you can make to improve your own life. Bear in mind, this book was written in 2007, and in some areas the science has progressed, although I believe the diet and exercise tips are still valid. Definitely go out and buy the book, as it has a motivational message that's too much to fit into this video.
The introduction cites a 20-year study where people were asked if they agreed with statements like, "As you get older, you are less useful." And the study found that perceptions about aging had more impact on how long they would live than their blood pressure, cholesterol, or whether they smoked or exercised. And on average, those with positive perceptions lived 7.5 years longer. The author talks about the demographic changes occurring in developed countries where there are so many more old people than there used to be, stating at the time of writing that a 20-year-old American had a 91% chance of having a living grandmother, whereas in 1900 the chance of having a living mother was only 83%.
Quoting the author, the average 21st century American will spend more years as a carer for their parents than for their children. And there's a problem in the developed world where old people are viewed as useless and the only people that matter are younger than 40. This book has been written to change that perception and show that you can lead a healthy and fulfilling life up to the age of 100 and beyond.
Part 1 looks at the world's healthiest and longest lived peoples. In the 1970s, Harvard professor Dr. Alexander Leaf was approached by National Geographic to write an article about the world's healthiest and longest lived people. At the time, anecdotally, there were 3 regions of the world where people were known for their longevity: Abkhazia in the Soviet Union, Vilcabamba in Ecuador, and Hunza in Pakistan. Dr. Leaf actually went to visit these places and test these anecdotes scientifically to see if there were any truth to the rumours. In some parts of this video, I'm going to refer to these areas as blue zones as a catch-all term for these and other known regions around the world, including Ikaria in Greece, Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, and Sardinia in Italy. This first chapter talks about Abkhazia. Former Abkhazian Director of Public Health, Shoto Gagosian, says that 80% of Abkhazians over 90 are mentally healthy and outgoing. Only 10% have poor hearing and fewer than 4% have poor eyesight. One study found that Abkhazian mountain dwellers live longer than their lowland counterparts, which suggests that traversing steep hills all the time is good for your health. A Dr. Sula Bennett found that there's a strong cultural aspect where the elderly are highly respected solely due to their age, regardless of personal achievements, so much so that they're celebrated with a public holiday each year. Researcher Dan Georgakis is quoted,
"In Abkhazia, the psychological climate for the old is so positive that government-funded care homes are rarely utilized, as relatives actively want to care for their elders."
The author states that Abkhazians lead a slow-paced life. They do a lot of singing, they're non-violent, and they deeply value friendships. They eat a lot of freshly picked fruit and vegetables, a fermented milk-based drink called matzoni, and a porridge called abista. They also eat a lot of nuts and very little meat. At the time of writing, the average cholesterol of centenarians in Abkhazia was 98 compared to the USA, where almost everyone's is over 200. They also ate less than 2,000 calories per day, with Americans eating 4,000. Chapter 2 talks about Vilcabamba. One study of the inhabitants found they were free of arteriosclerosis, heart disease, cancer, rheumatism, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's, concluding that the location somehow protected them from diseases that were common in the rest of the world. One Dr. David Davis, after several visits, suggested that Vilcabambans never seem to die of the major killing diseases that afflict the rest of the world. Then, in 1981, a Dr. Morton Walker visited Vilcabamba and came up with the same conclusion. conclusion. An international conference of health scientists agreed that Vilcabambans over age 70 had excellent cardiovascular health, almost no incidence of high blood pressure, and only 1/3 of the cardiac abnormalities found in the developed world. And they put this down to the inhabitants' leanness, their diet, their low cholesterol, and high levels of physical activity. Journalist Grace Housel lived in Vilcabamba for 2 years and noted how the inhabitants, despite living in poverty, had an authentic way of life and lived at their own pace with a deep respect held for elders in the community. They almost never eat meat, and their fats only come from nuts, seeds, and avocados. Their diet is mainly made up of freshly picked fruit and vegetables of all kinds. Nothing is processed or packaged. They also eat far fewer calories than Americans.
Throughout chapters 1 and 2, the author makes a lot of comparisons between these idyllic societies and the modern USA as an analogue for the developed Western world. And in chapter 2, he says of developed societies, ageism represents a prejudice against a group that all people will inevitably join if they live long enough. As a result, an ideology that equates aging with deterioration steals hope from everyone and from every stage of our lives.
Hunza is an extremely remote valley at the northernmost tip of Pakistan. On his visit, Dr. Leaf was impressed by how easily the local elders could traverse the steep mountain slopes of the region. One Dr. Robert McCarrison lived with the Hunzans for 7 years and is quoted as saying that the elderly inhabitants have excellent physiques, are free from disease in general, are long-lived and vigorous, are capable of great endurance, have highly stable nervous systems, and are free from cancer. One Dr. Paul Dudley White also visited the Hunzans. Examining a group of 25 men who were over 90, he found that none of them showed signs of heart disease, high blood pressure, or high cholesterol. They had 20/20 vision and no tooth decay. In the whole region of 30,000 people, he said, there was no vascular, muscular, organic, respiratory, or bone disease. Soon after, a Dr. J. Hoffman also visited and largely supported these findings. Optometrist Dr. Alan E. Bannock visited Hunza and tested the older inhabitants' vision. He found no signs of presbyopia, where it's harder to focus properly on anything close to your face, which is common in those aged over 40. The Hunzans eat a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables and are known for growing 20 varieties of apricots. They also consume a lot of flaxseed, beans, and lentils with minimal cooking. In the summer, up to 80% of their diet is made up of uncooked food. In the book, we're given this table comparing the 3 aforementioned blue zones, and it demonstrates that their eating habits are very similar to each other and are very different to the developed world. The author says that old people in the developed world have got into the habit of shrinking from challenges and avoiding all discomforts. Their passion for life has been replaced by an obsession with convenience and security. They're perfectly healthy, yet use their age as an excuse not to pursue their dreams. He goes on to quote businessman Samuel Allman.
Nobody grows old merely by a number of years. We grow old by deserting our ideals. Years may wrinkle the skin, but to give up enthusiasm wrinkles the soul.
Chapter 4 is about Okinawa. The epigraph reads,
Of all the self-fulfilling prophecies in our culture, the assumption that aging means decline and poor health is probably the deadliest.
Okinawa is a Japanese province made up of 161 islands. It differs from the aforementioned regions in that there's much more long-term scientific evidence regarding the outstanding health and longevity of its older inhabitants. Therefore, it has much more in common with the developed world that you, dear viewers, may well be living in. In 1975, Japan's government began the Okinawa Centenarian Study that continues to this day. We were set up to look into the health and longevity of Okinawa's inhabitants. Helped by meticulous record keeping since 1879, it can be stated that Okinawa is home to the world's healthiest old people, the world's longest life expectancies, and to the highest concentrations of verified centenarians in the world. Studies of these centenarians have found that 95% of those who make it to 100 have been free of major diseases into their 90s. Furthermore, at the time of writing, Okinawa was home to 15% of the world's super centenarians, whilst only having a tiny fraction of the world's population, or in other words, 75,000 times more supercentenarians than the average country. The ongoing study has found that Okinawan elders have incredibly young arteries, low risk for heart disease and stroke, low risk for hormone-dependent cancers, strong bones, sharp minds, slim bodies, natural menopause, healthy levels of sex hormones, low stress levels, and excellent psycho-spiritual health. In contrast, in developed Western countries at the time of writing, by the age of 70, most of us have lost 60% of maximal breathing capacity, 40% of kidney and liver function, 15 to 30% of bone mass, and 30% of strength.
Indeed, older Okinawans have only 20% as many heart attacks as North Americans, and those that do are twice as likely to survive.
Compared to someone in the USA, an Okinawan elder is 85% less likely to die from breast cancer and 70% less likely to die from ovarian or colon cancer. Furthermore, prostate cancer is almost non-existent in Okinawa, and only 6 in every 100,000 Okinawan women die from breast cancer. The author points to the nutrient-rich, low-calorie diet of the Okinawans being a key factor in their longevity, and references 4 academics that support this statement. At the time of writing, a lot of studies have shown that calorie restriction in rats had extended their lifespans by an average of 30%, and in 2006 the first human trials of 25 people showed they had lower levels of inflammation with healthier hearts and circulatory systems. The diets of the aforementioned peoples have the following in common. They are all low in calories and high in good carb. They are whole food diets with very little processed food. They're dependent on fresh foods, eating what they grow. They're low in fat, and the fats come from natural sources, and they're getting most of their protein from plant sources. Please note there are some other great YouTube videos about these societies that I will link in the description. Part 2 talks about food. Elder Okinawans eat no trans fats, and their high grain consumption, as shown in this table, is entirely made up of whole grains as opposed to the white flour based products that are more commonly eaten in the Western world. Here is a table showing the percentage of nutrients lost when whole wheat flour is refined into white flour. Taking an average of these, a whopping 71% of nutrients are lost. And although it's often stated that white flour products are fortified with vitamins and minerals, the author states that only 5 of 25 nutrients are actually restored. One meta-analysis looking at the role of whole grains in cancer prevention concluded that 43 out of 45 studies showed that whole grains were protective against several forms of cancer. At the time of writing, one article stated that the average American consumed the equivalent of 53 teaspoons of sugar per day, drank about 55 gallons of soda per year, and that a single 12-ounce can of soda had the equivalent of 13 teaspoons of sugar. Excess sugar consumption is linked to obesity, kidney stones, osteoporosis, heart disease, and dental cavities. And it's worth noting that sugar is empty calories in that there are no nutrients present, so your vitamin and mineral intake needs to come from yet more calories. On top of this, free sugars and white flour products are absorbed into the gut very quickly, and this causes damaging sugar spikes in your bloodstream. The author talks at length about the global obesity epidemic and how, even back then, it affected both developed and developing countries.
The author rails against the Atkins diet, which at the time of writing was a major fad diet that people were trying out. Dr. Atkins advocates eating whatever protein you want, including, for example, lovely bacon, sausages, and butter. But, crucially, you're to minimize carbohydrates. The author compares this with a diet advocated by Dr. Dean Ornish, which is much more like that of the Blue Zone inhabitants, and he provides numerous examples of why Ornish is better than Atkins.
One study of 4,000 people aged 40 to 59 found that the thinnest people eat the most healthful carbs, concluding that, without exception, a high complex carbohydrate diet is associated with low body mass. In 2002, writing about the Harvard Adult Development Study that had followed 1,000 healthy people over a 60-year period, Dr. George E. Vaillant concluded that, quote,
"The whole process of aging sometimes feels completely out of our control. But, blessed with prospectively gathered data, I was astonished at how much of healthy aging or lack of it is predicted by factors that are more or less controllable.
In the 1930s, a dentist called Weston A. Price travelled the world meeting a large number of indigenous tribes. Photography was a fairly new technology at the time, and also it was a time when these tribes were encountering more and more Western influence. Price took a lot of photos which, he claimed, showed how the adoption of Western diets had been bad for their teeth and gums. He surmised that this could imply similar damage to the health of other organs or bodily functions.
This is supported by Dr. Stanislas Tanchu, who formed Tanchu's doctrine, the theory that the incidence of cancer increases in direct proportion to the civilization of a people, and this was later corroborated by several other doctors. I feel that this is supported from many angles in literature about longevity and aging, the crux of it being that we evolved to be hunter-gatherers living in tribes. Then, around 12,000 years ago, some of us started farming, and only about 90 years ago did we begin to live even a semblance of the modern lives we live today. The China study, described by the New York Times as the Grand Prix of Epidemiology, was instigated by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai in the early 1970s, after he himself was dying of liver cancer. It was a nationwide survey to collect information about the extent and location of cancer in China, and had more than 650,000 participants. It catalogued the death rates for 12 different cancers all across China, and found differences of up to 2,000% between the lowest and highest incidences in different provinces. It was a golden opportunity due to its scope and the moment in history. 87% of the population were Han Chinese, and so had genetic similarity. And, beginning in 1983, it occurred before China became too heavily influenced by the developed Western world. Furthermore, at the time, 90% of adults still lived in the area where they were born. The study found that diseases of poverty arise from nutritional inadequacy and poor sanitation. Also, it found that diseases of affluence arise from nutritional excess. Diseases of poverty include pneumonia, tuberculosis, diarrhea, respiratory illnesses, and measles, whereas diseases of affluence include diabetes, coronary heart disease, obesity, and cancer, and all these are associated with high blood cholesterol. At the outset of the study, heart disease was 17 times less frequent than in the West, and was almost non-existent in Sichuan and Guizhou provinces. Dr. T. Colin Campbell, director of the China study and author of a 2005 book with the same name, wrote that
the most dramatic findings of the China project was the strong association between foods of animal origin and cancer. We found that one of the strongest predictors of Western diseases was blood cholesterol. Lower blood cholesterol levels were linked to lower rates of heart disease, cancer, and other Western diseases. As blood cholesterol levels decreased, a wide range of cancers decreased. It's not enough simply to make a few small dietary changes to prevent cancer. A major shift towards plant-based foods and away from animal foods is likely to produce much greater benefits.
A study of American nurses found that women who ate meat daily were 2.5 times more likely to get colon cancer than those who ate meat less than once a month. Also, a review of the research on dairy products and prostate cancer found that those who had, over the course of their lives, consumed the most dairy products had double the rate of advanced prostate cancer and 4 times the rate of metastatic prostate cancer compared with those who consumed less dairy products. A high intake of fruit and veg was also associated with a lower risk. A meta-analysis looked at 4,500 studies on diet and cancer. Within this, analysis of 200 studies on a link between food and cancer found that 78% of the fruit and vegetables tested were protective against one or more types of cancer. Overall, the report recommended to
choose predominantly plant-based diets rich in a variety of vegetables and fruits, legumes, and minimally processed starchy staple foods.
And still you may protest. But what about the person who drinks like a fish, smokes like a furnace, eats like a hog, and is nonetheless 85 years old? By the same analogy, you may once in a while drive from San Francisco to Los Angeles at 120 miles an hour and still get there, but don't bet on it. Maybe suicide doesn't work the first time around, but try again. The odds get better.
Dr. Dean Ornish is known for the Lifestyle Heart Trial, which compared his program of lifestyle changes with the American Heart Association's heart disease program, which included the use of medications. The trial found that on the Ornish program, LDL cholesterol fell from 152 to 95 milligrams per deciliter. The frequency of chest pain was reduced by 91%, and 3 in 4 participants reversed their heart disease. Conversely, the AHA program was found to result in higher LDL cholesterol, a 165% increase in chest pain frequency, and only 1 in 6 participants reversed their heart disease. Also, the InterHeart study found that 9 diet and lifestyle factors accounted for 94% of heart attack risk in women and 90% in men. The author talks at length about how a plant-based diet is optimal for our health and quotes several doctors that support his views. He talks about the health benefits of eating flax seeds that have a higher content of lignans than any other food. Flax seeds are also a source of omega-3 fatty acids that are essential for human health and are woefully lacking in Western diets. However, the crucial DHA and EPA content is better absorbed if you get it from eating fish instead of flax seeds. There is a myth that vegetarians are more likely to have an iron deficiency. Iron found in meat and fish is called heme iron, whereas vegetable sources contain non-heme iron. Heme iron is more easily absorbed, but this means it can actually lead to an excess in the body, increasing oxidative stress, whereas with non-heme iron, your body only takes exactly what it needs. An excess of iron in the body is considered by one Dr. Thomas T. Pearls as being a big contributor to physiological aging, and it's thought that women may live longer than men due to their menstrual cycles that purge the body each month, reducing iron levels in the blood. Part 3 is about exercise. As recently as the 1960s, many experts thought that vigorous exercise was actually dangerous for those aged over 50, but it seems that modern scientists think they were wrong. One study found that participants' death rates fell in direct proportion to the number of calories burned each week. The more active they were, the longer they lived. Dr. Walter M. Bortz, who we've met before, coined the term disuse syndrome to describe the well-known principle that any part of the body that falls into disuse will begin to atrophy. Use it or lose it. Dr. Maria Fitteroni got chronically ill nursing home residents to lift weights 3 times a week for 2 months and found that the participants' average walking speed nearly tripled and their balance improved by 50%. Many no longer needed their canes and their self-confidence soared. The diabetes prevention program took over 3,000 people who had pre-diabetes and divided them into 3 groups. Group 1 took metformin, an anti-diabetes drug. Group 2 took a placebo, and Group 3 had to eat less calories, less fat, and had to do regular moderate exercise. Group 3 was found to have 58% fewer incidences than Group 2 and was twice as effective as taking metformin.
The results were so spectacular that they stopped the trial early so that all participants could adopt the regime of Group 3. Furthermore, for those aged over 60, the improvement in Group 3 was 71%, and 1/3 of that same group completely reversed their pre-diabetes. Do you have pre-diabetes? What if all you had to do to reverse it was start going for a walk for 30 minutes a day?
Another study found that people who exercised regularly slept almost an hour longer each night and fell asleep in half the time.
It's a myth in Western societies that a gradual decline is inevitable as we age and that we have no control over it whatsoever. The author writes at length about Jack LaLanne, who has since died at age 96. LaLanne led an astonishing life, and according to Wikipedia, he even kept up his fitness regime until 1 week before his death.
A 1991 book called Biomarkers explained that your muscles play a big part in the vitality of your body. A high muscle-to-fat ratio increases your metabolic rate, allowing you to more easily burn body fat and increase muscle tissue. On the other hand, a slower metabolic rate makes it more difficult to lose weight and easier to gain fat. The reason is that muscle burns more calories than fat, even at rest. Indeed, 1 pound of muscle burns roughly 15 more calories a day than 1 pound of fat. Over the course of a year, this equates to a difference of 12 pounds of body weight. Studies have shown that exercise regimens that build muscles produce a cascade of positive health effects. Building and maintaining muscle strength helps you to preserve your aerobic capacity, keep your blood pressure low, retain a healthy blood sugar tolerance, sustain the mineral density of your bones, and stabilize your body's ability to regulate its internal temperature. Aerobic capacity is one measure of your heart, lung, and circulatory health. It includes your ability to breathe amounts of air into your lungs for aeration of your blood, and your ability to transport oxygen to all parts of your body through your bloodstream. Elders in the blue zones retain most of their aerobic capacity even into their 90s, whereas by age 65, the average American has lost 30 to 40% of theirs. For most of us in the industrialized world, increasing the strength of our muscles and decreasing the amount of body fat we carry around is one of the most meaningful steps we can take on the path to healthy aging. One study looked at the bone health of older women and found that a daily brisk walk for 45 minutes led to a significantly greater increase of bone strength than calcium supplements, and this finding was supported in another study by a Dr. Everett Smith. Furthermore, after publishing a study looking at younger women over a 10-year period, Professor Tony Lloyd commented,
"Calcium is often cited as the most important factor for healthy bones. Our study suggests that exercise is really the predominant lifestyle determinant of bone strength in young women."
The author includes a long commentary from one Ruth Heidrich, who, after being diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in her 40s, looked into lifestyle changes to try and reverse her deterioration. She started running and has since completed several Ironman triathlons, and in 2023 she's in her late 80s and still running marathons, 4 decades after her diagnosis.
The epigraph for chapter 11 reads,
Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live.
This chapter is about your mental faculties as you get older, and begins by explaining how there is a spiraling prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in America, and therefore a spiraling cost. One study found that people with the highest physical activity levels were 50% less likely to develop Alzheimer's, and concluded that the more people exercise, the healthier their brains remain as they grow older. This was supported by 2 studies in the Journal of the AMA. One found that, for older women, walking only 2 hours a week at an easy pace made a clear difference, and one found that older men who walked 2 miles a day had only half the rate of Alzheimer's compared with those who only walked a quarter mile a day. A lot of studies have found that exercise makes the brain more adaptive, so it's easier to learn new things. If your diet is high in antioxidants, your risk of many age-related diseases goes down. These include cancer, heart disease, macular degeneration, and cataracts. A plant-based diet such as those eaten in the blue zones has been shown in many studies to dramatically lower the incidence of dementia in older people. In 2004, Dr. Mia Kivipelto told an international conference about her 21-year study, which found that people who were obese in middle age were twice as likely to develop dementia when they got old compared to those who were of normal weight. For those who also had high cholesterol and high blood pressure in middle age, the risk of dementia was 6 times higher. There's much evidence shared regarding homocysteine levels in the blood. In 1998, Dr. David Smith presented to the annual Science Reporters Conference. His study found that if a person's homocysteine levels were in the top third of the group, then their risk of getting Alzheimer's disease was a monumental 4.5 times greater than the rest. Blood levels of homocysteine can be reduced by increasing your intake of folic acid and vitamin B12. One study found that the incidence of Alzheimer's was a staggering 3.3 times greater among people whose folic acid levels were in the lowest third, and 4.3 times greater for those with the lowest levels of B12. One study of 370 healthy old people found that those with even slightly low levels of vitamin B12 and folic acid had twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to those with normal levels. The book goes on to explain that a plant-based diet also minimizes homocysteine levels in the blood.
So, make sure you consume plenty of folic acid, vitamin B6 and B12, and eat less meat. Quoting from the book, our inability to cure or effectively treat Alzheimer's makes prevention all the more important, and the example of the world's most healthy and long-lived societies all the more meaningful. The key to cognitive health is having goals and things to look forward to, and knowing that you're doing the work you were put on this earth to do.
A large study by the MacArthur Foundation looked at what factors enable some people to retain their mental faculties as they get older. The study found that those who remain engaged in activities, those that have a can-do attitude, and those with a sense of self-efficacy are going to fare a lot better.
Due to the subject matter, this chapter is light on mention of academic studies that support the author's claims. However, he uses some interesting anecdotes to get his message across.
Part 4 is about social interactions.
As recently as the 1970s, anyone who said there were profound medical consequences to human relationships would have had their sanity questioned by modern science. And anyone blaming loneliness for physical illness would have been laughed at. But in the last few decades, there's been an explosion of scientific understanding about the deep connections between interpersonal relationships and health.
In his 1998 book, Love and Survival, Dr. Dean Ornish says that he is
not aware of any other factor that has a greater impact on our quality of life, incidence of illness, and premature death than love and relationships.
This is supported in a study which followed 86 women with breast cancer over 10 years. Half of them had to attend weekly support groups in addition to their medical treatments, and half did not. The study found that those in the support groups had double the survival time after entering the program, which on average extended their lives by 18 months. A similar study by a Dr. F.I. Fawzi looking at skin cancer patients found that the women attending support groups lived 3 times longer than the others. Another study followed 10,000 men over 5 years and tested them for angina risk factors such as high cholesterol. Of those that had high risk factors, they found that those who answered yes to "Does your wife show you her love?" had substantially less angina.
This chapter references several other studies that reproduce the above findings, and the author tells a number of very moving anecdotes that are beyond the scope of this summary.
Chapter 14 gives us this chart, which illustrates how, for men, being divorced or widowed can have almost as much impact on premature death as being a smoker. One study followed 7,000 people over 9 years and found that those who had no social network were 3 times more likely to die within that period, and a Swedish study of 17,000 people had similar results.
Even having a loving relationship with a pet is shown to reduce your mortality. Isn't that right, Doctor?
The beta blocker heart attack trial followed 2,300 male heart attack survivors to see if taking beta blocker drugs reduced their risk of premature death. The drugs were found to be effective, but not as effective as the simple fact of having strong social connections, which reduced the risk by 3/4. Today, these beta blockers are widely prescribed in the developed world. However, a prescription of "you need to spend more time making social connections" is rarely given out.
The importance of a loving relationship with your spouse is discussed, and conversely, how a negative relationship with a spouse can have a significant impact on your health.
A book by Dr. James Lynch looks closely at how our relationships with our parents can have significant lasting impacts on our health and longevity. His book references a study that asked 125 students about their relationships with their parents, and then, 35 years later, looked at their medical histories. The study found that 91% of those who said they had an unloving relationship with their mothers had suffered serious medical crises by the time they reached their late 50s.
Wrapping up this chapter, the author explains that one of the great secrets of the Blue Zones is that no one is ever made to feel flawed, imperfect, or unworthy of love, whereas the culture in developed Western societies has led to increased loneliness and isolation for the elderly.
Part 5 is about self-care.
The first part of Chapter 16 gives us information and commentary regarding the economic situation of people globally, how different cultures are linked to this, and particularly how American culture is becoming too self-centered. Next, the author tells us part of his life story, how he happens to be the heir to the hugely successful Baskin-Robbins ice cream empire, and how he disappointed his father by not wanting to be involved. In 1969, him and his wife moved to a remote island in Canada and lived in a log cabin for 10 years, where he later delivered his own son, born on the kitchen table.
Much is said about the African Bushmen and Pygmies, extant hunter-gatherer societies that share much of the positive cultures of those in the Blue Zones. However, it's suggested that the merit of these societies is that they're the oldest surviving traditions on the planet, implying that they must be doing something right to have lasted this long.
This chapter becomes quite preachy. It's very much an opinion piece and is repetitive in places. The general message being that we all need to love each other more and be less selfish. Seems like good advice. The author goes into a long tirade about how the Blue Zone cultures, along with the Pygmies and Bushmen, are suffering due to the encroachment of the modern world and Western consumerism.
The Abkhazians tried to secede from Georgia in 1993 and faced a military conflict that left 100,000 dead. Vilcabamba has been turned into a tourist attraction, and Hunza has been connected to China via the Karakoram Highway.
I feel there isn't much to learn from this chapter. The general message is traditional cultures are good, whereas modern Western culture is bad. Although there's some merit in this viewpoint, I'm not entirely convinced. A sad story is told of a couple who lived an exemplary life of healthful diet and exercise, only for the husband to die of cancer in his early 50s. The author explains that no action we can take is 100% going to save us, and that we should work to accept the cycle of aging, life, and death.
When we ask life to remain perpetually spring, we turn the natural process of life into a process of loss, rather than a process of celebration and appreciation.
You will have noticed that there are 5 parts to this book. Parts 2 to 5 each end with a steps you can take section, with advice about what you can do to improve your personal health and longevity. There are so many pointers that I've only got time to share some of the best ones as follows.
Taking steps towards a better diet can make a huge difference to your health and longevity, even if you've eaten poorly for years. One reason is that although you may think of your body as a permanent structure, most of your body's tissues are actually in a constant state of renewal. The cells lining your stomach are replaced every 5 days. Your red blood cells last about 4 months, and your liver cells are replaced every 300 to 500 days. Even your bones are far from permanent. The entire human skeleton renews itself every 10 years. Almost all the cells in your body are being continually regenerated, so what you eat today literally becomes your body tomorrow. You are what you eat. The book suggests that you should eat whole grains like beans and sweet potatoes, healthy proteins like lentils and peas, healthy fats like nuts and seeds, leafy greens like kale and spinach, broccoli, flax seeds, and dark chocolate with 70% cocoa or higher. The book suggests that you should avoid fatty meats, dairy products, corn oil, soybean oil, and sunflower oil, soft drinks, and diet sodas. Also, any food that contains trans fats such as margarine and convenience foods, high fructose corn syrup, and flour such as bread, crackers, chips, and pastries. In terms of your eating habits and activities, the book suggests the following steps. Eat slowly and chew thoroughly. Eat just to the point of fullness without feeling stuffed. And remember, it takes 20 minutes for your stomach to register how full it is. Always read the label so you can pick the most nutritious foods. Use olive oil or canola oil for cooking. Avoid heating oils to the smoking point. Restaurants don't care about your health. Instead of eating out, invite friends over for dinner. Pack your own lunch to avoid being tempted by off-the-shelf junk food. If you do eat meat, get free-range or organic. Favor organic fruit and veg, and if possible, grow your own. If you eat fish, be sure that it's low in mercury. Put healthy snacks in a conspicuous and accessible part of the fridge. When you crave something crunchy, try raw vegetables or nuts instead of junk food. In your salads, use romaine and other lettuces rather than iceberg. Part 3 gives the following tips on exercise. Make exercise a social activity with friends. Jog or hike on trails rather than pavement. To enhance sleep, exercise regularly outdoors. Exercise for at least 30 minutes a day. Create an exercise program that you enjoy and fits well into your life. Once in a while, go on a media fast. Part 4 gives tips on interpersonal relationships as follows. No matter how great the faults of another person, strive to also be aware of her good qualities. If you're dealing with an illness or personal struggle that may be shared by others, join or start a support group. Look for opportunities to enrich the lives of others. Ask a friend if there's a way you could be a better friend to him. Recall someone who helped you when you needed it. Write or tell her of your appreciation. Rather than buying gifts for friends, give experiences. Massage their neck and shoulders, make them dinner, babysit, plan a picnic or other special outing to enjoy together.
The author even suggests to clean their house for them. I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to do that.
Great relationships don't just happen because you're in love. They take work and lots of it. Take an objective look at your own behavior. If someone important to you is being defensive, ask whether you're doing anything to make them so. Nurture the friendships with which you feel at ease. Move on from those that are stressful to maintain. Support, encourage, and assist any young people or elderly people that you know. Set an example. Learn from people who are different from you. Don't let differences of opinion become causes of estrangement. Part 5 gives the following advice on looking after yourself. Take pleasure in small things. Defy the myth that more is always better. Give away everything that is cluttering your life. Have nothing in your house that is not useful or beautiful. Consider what you would want to do if you knew you only had 6 months to live. Stand for your vision of what is possible and never underestimate your power to make a difference. Write in your journal or talk to friends or family about your death. Describe your vision of how you want to die.
So, there you have it. An inspirational book with plenty of practical advice. Well researched and written with an aim to truly help people. Despite some preachy, repetitive parts near the end, I really can't recommend this book enough, and particularly to those looking to improve their self-care, diet and exercise. See you next time.